So for the end of the lecture, we're just going to look at testing the Home Hub. These tests are a little bit different because we're just going to check the output that's printed is correct. Okay, so we're not going to we're not going to test all the variables. We're going to just test the output printed to the console, which in a sense is testing the variables because it's based on what the variables are set to, but we're not actually checking the values. And we can check that captured output using this capsys that I mentioned. And if you use capsys is passed into our test functions by PyTest as the captured output. The stuff that's been printed out won't have been printed out. It'll be captured somewhere by PyTest and given to us, and then we can using capsys.readoutError.out that will give us the output, which is it will give us the output that was printed by the application since the last time we called readoutError. And again, we can use a single function to check multiple devices. So at the moment, this code just checks the on-off methods for these devices. So here's the code. So as I say, it's a little bit more complicated than the previous examples. So this is my test devices file. Okay, and so that will get picked up by PyTest, and it's got a function called test devices, and it just it does a check on off for each device, and you can see it's got each check on off. We pass in the capsys, we pass in a device, which is we create a new object. So this is kind of trying to keep the code quite minimal, and we check that device has its value set to its type set to this final variable here. So we're passing in an object, but this thing here, the value that we're passing in must match the object name. We also pass in some other values, so the type of thing that we can set and what the default setting value is. So notice these kind of match all the objects that we've already had. So the spotlight, if you remember, it has brightness that you can increase, which is set to 350 initially. The heating has temperature you can increase or decrease, set to 18 initially, and the music player has volume set to 7 initially. We pass those in. And we have to pass in more information for some devices like the spotlight and the music player, which also print out settings. Okay, so what does the check on-off function do? First of all, it checks that the captured output says the device has been initialized, because that's when we create a new object, always the object says it's been initialized. So when we create a new light here, that will print to the output that it's been initialized. So we have to check that has happened, that it said the name has been initialized. Then we can switch the device on here, and we can expect expect that the output will then say the name of that device is on. Sometimes there's an extra detail which for the music player is it will say it's paused, but anything else it won't say anything. And then if it's got a setting, we can also check that setting is correct. Okay, so not everything will print out the same way. And then we can check what happens when we switch the output off, and that the expected output is set to the name is off, and then we can print out with capsys disabled that we've tested it successfully. Assuming all these assert statements work, that the output is what we expect, then they will have worked. I've kind of skipped over this because it's a bit more complicated, and we haven't tested other functions such as up, down, play, pause, because they take a bit more work. But that will test all the devices and check that the on-off settings are correct in quite a minimal bit of code. So what you can do is, in order to run that, you can run all the tests by just right-clicking it. As I said before, you can run all the tests in PyTest, all the tests in Hub06 by just clicking, right-clicking on the folder and selecting Run PyTest, or Control-Shift F10. Okay, and if you do that in this folder, let's do that. See, the testing started, and it tells us it tested ceiling light on off successfully, ceiling lamp on off successfully, and so on. Okay, and you could even do that in the whole folder by running it as I'm showing you on this slide. You can run it in the whole folder by running it on TO6 testing. There we go. Run it on the whole folder, and that'll test all the test classes in that folder. So it does a recursive drop down into all the folders. So you can see it's tested the Uni app, it's tested the Home Hub, and it's tested the pizza as well. Okay, so that's a kind of quick introduction to unit testing. So what you'll see, mostly what you're trying to do is check that objects values are set correctly. You can also check that the output is set correctly, so by checking using capsys. Though that starts to get more complicated because it's harder to match up the output. It's easier to actually select the data stored inside an object and check that that's correct. As I mentioned, this is part of a typical professional practice in software development. So often people will have a team writing these unit tests that might be different from the developer team, and they will go through the code. Obviously, they have to read through the code, make sure that they've captured every possible line of code, and make sure that it's tested, and then check that these tests will then, once they're written, will be run lots and lots of times, every time probably a software release is planned. We've seen we can do that with PyTest. It's easy to configure with PyCharm, and it has two important features we need, which are, one is the assert statement, which is just a standard Python statement, but it's really useful in unit testing, and the other is the capsys, the captured system out, which we can then check what the program is trying to print out and make sure it's what we expect it is printing out. And we've seen a number of examples there, the different versions of the Uni app and the pizza and the Home Hub, and we've seen how we can run all the tests in the same folder. Okay, I hope that made sense to you, and I hope that you get to try some of these ideas out.